boundaries are not rejection and they're not a punishment. It's not you building rigid walls. They're more about connection and healthy relationships. And you don't owe anyone a massively long, full explanation in order for you to set them. Welcome to Healing Childhood Trauma, the podcast for millennial women who are ready to heal from the past. Here, we have the deeper discussions on emotional well-being and practical tips that will empower you to transform your relationships and underlying anxiety from insecure to secure attachment. I'm Lizandra, your host and psychotherapist. I'm a little bit obsessed with human development, deep conversations, and finding the lesson even in the most challenging of circumstances. I'm very happy to have you with me on this journey of self-discovery where we unpack the past and heal in the present. Hello, my lovely. Today is a boundaries episode because why not? A couple of my friends have actually been calling me the boundaries queen, which I'm not mad at. I kind of like it. So that's what we're going to be doing in today's episode. I'm going to be breaking down boundary setting, the types of boundaries that you need to be aware of, how to set them, and giving you some very practical examples of what this looks like. And it's also a really good reminder for me as well, because even though I do a lot of work in the boundary space, I'm very comfortable with boundary setting for the most part. But that being said, it doesn't mean that I do things perfectly. It doesn't mean that when it comes to setting boundaries that I don't either sometimes make mistakes or I don't say it in the right way. I might come off too harsh. I might be too loose with my boundaries, or I might not even recognize necessarily that I should have set one, or I might kind of recognize it in hindsight. And that's something that's happened actually quite recently. I wrote about it to my email list a little while ago. So if you're not already on my email list, do sign up, because I do kind of go into sometimes some different things that I don't necessarily talk about either on social media or sometimes not even in this podcast. So you do get different types of content in my different spaces. So if you are more of a person who likes reading, be sure to check that out. But I had a very harsh reminder about the importance of boundaries and what happens when you don't set boundaries, or when you don't pay attention to the signs of when you need to actually listen more to what makes you feel uncomfortable and to act on it, and to not always worry about whether you're overthinking things or whether you're being paranoid and not trusting your own judgment. Sometimes you can kind of find that out in a way that really tests you, that really makes you question your judgment at times. And it's just to normalize that if you have done work on your boundary setting, and sometimes you're good at it, sometimes you're average at it, sometimes you're terrible at it, it's just one of those things, because boundaries are so context dependent and there's going to be so many other factors that come in. It's always something that's going to come up for you, I think, especially if you haven't been modeled boundaries and it's not something that comes naturally to you. It's something that you've had to work at, because it's so easy to go back to familiar patterns or patterns that stem from childhood. It's easier to have those moments or even a lapse of judgment. And that was a very harsh lesson that I had to learn recently, of the boundaries that I set in place are there for a reason. And if I'm not respecting those boundaries, then other people won't either. This episode is for anybody who struggles with setting boundaries, who feels like a people pleaser, who worries about what other people might think of them, worries about hurting other people's feelings, saying things too harshly, and also just people who feel like a lot of the time people just take the bloody piss. And no matter how much they do for people, it always ends up feeling like it's not enough. And whenever they kind of give a little bit, people just end up crossing that line and always wanting and sometimes even expecting more. And so if you build up resentment in your relationships because of that, or you avoid certain people or you avoid certain situations because of that, quite often that can be your sign that there's a boundary that needs to be set there. There's a need of yours that hasn't been met. There is something about that person or that situation that is making you feel uncomfortable. And I've got quite a few different resources on boundary setting as well. So if you want something a little bit more concrete, or you just want to expand on what I've discussed in this episode, then I'm going to post a few links in the show notes. Most of them are free. I think there might be one that's a paid guide. And what I'll do is, as you are a podcast listener, I will just offer a discount code as well so that you can get it for just a little bit more money off, because who doesn't like a cheeky little deal, right? So I will post the discount code for that and the link in the show notes, as well as the guides that are also free. Boundaries are very misunderstood in a very simplified way. A lot of the time, people think that it's just about saying no, but actually boundaries are a lot more, they're deeper than that. It's not just about saying no. Sometimes it's actually about saying yes. And that can come from boundaries just generally being misunderstood as something that is just very rigid in nature and is designed to reinforce this idea. And it's a very westernized idea of individuality, and we don't need anybody, don't let anybody, take advantage of you. Obviously, yes, don't let anyone take advantage of you. It just has this it's all about me kind of rhetoric. And boundaries are not just about preserving the self or being individualistic and thinking that you don't need anyone, because we all need people, we all need community, we all need relationship, and to feel part of something bigger, to feel part of community, to feel part of belonging. And boundaries assist with that. There is a part of boundaries that is about self-protection, but there's also a really important part about boundaries that is about connection. Because when we're trying to set a boundary with someone, it's not because we are trying to keep distance from them. It's because we want to be in connection with them. We want to be in relationship with them. And so when we're trying to set boundaries with someone, it's doing it from a space of, this is what helps me to be in a relationship with you. This is what makes me feel comfortable. This is how we can have a balanced relationship with each other, where you feel heard and valued and I feel heard and valued. So the idea of setting boundaries comes from a place of love, self-preservation, self-love, connection, healthy relationships, and all of those things that help us to feel in community. The act of setting boundaries itself is also, being that I'm also trauma informed and I do talk quite a bit about nervous system and nervous system regulation, there is lots of research that is showing how important that is in trauma recovery and in the line of therapy. That it's not just what you talk through, but it's also what's happening in the body. And when it comes to trauma-informed care and holistic care, it's also paying attention to mind, body, spirit, and it's the whole person, it's the whole being, as opposed to just talking through trauma or having like a very one-sided or simplistic view about healing. There can be a lot of shame and a lot of discomfort around setting boundaries if it hasn't felt safe for you in the past to do so, and you haven't seen what it actually looks like when it's done well. And when you find that difficult and you have a very strong physiological response, so when the feeling of, as a typical example, that people who are people pleasers tend to experience and want to avoid, is that feeling of guilt, shame, rejection. Those really strong feelings and emotions are what prevents people from setting boundaries, particularly if they have trauma in their history. And that's because it's your nervous system reacting to boundaries as though it's something that is unsafe. So your nervous system is responding in a way that makes you feel like it's life or death. And at the same time, setting boundaries is regulating for your nervous system, because the act of boundary setting is about safety seeking. It's about trying to find safety in relationships. And although initially, when you haven't had that feeling of safety, it can feel like a threat. But the more that you practice setting boundaries and the more that you almost build up your tolerance for sitting in that discomfort of guilt, for example, the more your nervous system gets used to setting boundaries and sees it as a thing of safety as opposed to a thing of threat. I'm just conscious of time, so let's jump into the different types of boundaries that you can consider setting. So the first one is on physical boundaries. And when we are thinking of that, we are looking at personal space, we are looking at body autonomy and touch. And a typical example of that can be that perhaps you're not comfortable hugging people that you don't know particularly well. And people who have experienced childhood trauma where their physical body was not respected in terms of physical touch, it's very easy to then blur this line of, is it okay to say no? Or can you even recognize when your physical boundaries have been violated? So when somebody is too close or somebody is invading your space in some way, parents can sometimes almost encourage or force children who are not in the mood to be physical with, say, like a grandparent or an aunt or a family friend, and say, you know, give so-and-so a hug, give so-and-so a kiss. And the kid's really like, yeah, I don't want to. And, you know, sometimes the parent can see it as, well, that's a sign of respect. So, you know, you greet and you give physical connection to the grown-ups. And I think we're learning more why that's not appropriate and why we need to listen to children when they are physically uncomfortable. And that's a very early modelling of what it looks like as a child to have your boundaries respected if you are not being forced to override your feeling of discomfort just to make somebody else feel okay. And while parents can be well-meaning and, you know, there's no malice or ill intent around it, some of these smaller ways that children can be forced into overriding their discomfort or not listening to their particular boundaries is why, as an adult, it makes it even harder for you to then be assertive about saying no when it comes to physical boundaries and it comes to physical safety. Then there are emotional boundaries. And emotional boundaries is separating your emotions from other people and not either absorbing their feelings or feeling responsible for their emotions. You can support someone and be empathic towards someone without actually taking on their pain as though it's happening to you. And this can be especially hard for people who see themselves as empaths, because the lines are blurred between being an empath and somewhat codependent. Because being somebody who is an empath without boundaries is codependency, because you're not able to separate yourself, your feelings, your emotions from the emotions of somebody else. Because the practice of boundaries is knowing the space between where you begin and end and where somebody else begins and ends. And so that can relate in a very physical sense of the physical boundaries, but it can also be in terms of the emotional boundaries and knowing whose feelings belong to who. And sometimes that line can really get blurred. And another example of that is in a relationship. Perhaps your partner is in like a terrible foul mood, and next thing you know, you're also in a foul mood you're worrying that they're in a mood because you've done something, or it's something about you, you've said the wrong thing, or you've upset them in some way, when sometimes it's just not about you. They're just in a bad mood because it's regular and normal to sometimes just be in a bad mood. And it might not even be about you. And then there are mental boundaries. And that is honouring your right to your thoughts, to your beliefs, to your ideas and your opinions, and not feeling as though somebody else's opinions and thoughts cancel out your opinions and thoughts. And being okay to see things differently, being okay with difference, and not feeling like you have to be agreeable or everybody has to feel the same. And in toxic or dysfunctional families, there is almost a hive mind where everybody is expected to think, feel, behave, react in a certain way. It's almost seen as though disagreement is a betrayal, rather than you being an individual and you having your own ideas and your own beliefs and values that might not necessarily come from your cultural background or your family's belief systems. Then there are time boundaries, and that relates to you protecting how you spend your time. And time boundaries might be more important to you. For some people, time boundaries are a big deal. For other people, not so much. So you might be offended if, you're scheduled to meet up with a friend and they're half an hour late, and it's something that happens consistently. It might feel like your time boundaries are not being respected. Or in a work context, maybe if you're being expected to reply to work emails outside of working hours or on weekends, or having, long conversations with your boss when you're supposed to have like a week off or time off sick, you might find it really hard to articulate your boundaries around that. And so you can end up feeling quite resentful when people encroach on your time because they're almost assuming that you're always available to them. And so you can start to feel quite resentful about that, understandably so. Then there are material boundaries, and that relates to your belongings, your physical items, money, and perhaps, you're not comfortable with lending people money, or perhaps you're not comfortable with people borrowing your car. I remember a friend telling me a situation about a friend borrowing their car and smoking in their car, even though they're a non-smoker, and even though they've asked, please don't smoke in the car. And this friend was smoking in the car anyway, which is a total violation of boundaries because your request is not being respected. And this can often be linked to a feeling of guilt because, say in this scenario, my friend had said, okay, well, you can't use my car. She might have ended up feeling really guilty and bad about that because she wants to be a giving person and she wants to be able to help out. Some cultures, that's almost prized over your self-respect. It's almost seen as a good thing to give beyond your means or to keep giving and to be selfless as an endearing quality, but being generous doesn't have to come at the expense of your needs and your respect. Then there's sexual boundaries, and that's about your comfort with intimacy, that's about consent, that's about the pace even of being intimate with someone. And perhaps for some people, you might need more emotional safety before you're ready to go into physical safety. And if somebody isn't willing or prepared to give you that, then that's that's most definitely them pushing the line of your boundary. That's them pushing for you to be physically intimate before you actually feel comfortable to. And when you've experienced childhood abuse, that can really be deeply impacted by this. It can be difficult for you to be able to recognize that it's even okay for you to set boundaries around consent and around intimacy because you haven't had your physical boundaries or your sexual boundaries respected in the past. So sexual boundaries can be one that really takes a lot of work and a lot of reprogramming and listening more to bodily cues, understanding what it feels like, paying attention more to your body, which when you have been a victim of assault, it can be harder to feel more in connection with your body. Quite often, because of the nature of that type of trauma, you can become very disconnected from your body, understandably, to actually cope with the trauma. So that can take some work, feeling and getting more comfortable to paying attention to your bodily cues and recognizing what discomfort feels like, being able to actually verbalize that. But regardless, it's still such an important boundary type that we just really need to be aware of. And then there are energetic boundaries. And that's about protecting your energy and protecting your capacity, protecting your nervous system, not overworking yourself or pushing yourself to keep going, keep pushing yourself through burnout, past burnout, overgiving your emotional time, giving a lot of emotional labor in your relationships, which is typical in insecure attachment and especially in anxious attachment, overgiving in your relationships, doing a lot of the emotional work because the person who is more avoidant isn't able to do that. So you end up overcompensating and overfunctioning in the relationship. And so energetic boundaries are really useful when it comes to recovery from burnout and being able to say no to things more and recognizing when it's time for you to rest and prioritize yourself, whether that is for rest or whether that is for, just changing what it is that you're expected to do, listening to more of what your body needs. It might not be rest, it might even just be more movement. And then this last one that I'm going to add is around self-boundaries. And self-boundaries are more around the promises that you keep to yourself, because that builds self-trust. So if you are constantly telling yourself that, oh, I'll do this thing and I'll do it later, a typical one of, oh, I'm going to start going to the gym, I'm going to start on Monday. Monday comes, Monday goes, you don't go to the gym. You're breaking that promise to yourself. It's about doing the thing that you say that you're going to do. So like in a friendship or a relationship, you might not make promises that you have no intention of keeping. So you don't say that you're going to do something or you're going to go somewhere and then just don't do it. Most people like to be a person of their word. So if they say they're going to do it, they like to follow through. But if you're not doing that for yourself, then you're not respecting your own boundaries. You're disregarding your own boundaries. You're not listening to yourself. Self-boundaries are about you honoring your own limits and listening to your own values and your own commitments. So it's the boundaries that you hold with you. It's following through on what you said you were going to do for yourself. It's to stop you from sabotaging yourself. Because when you grow up in chaos or in an unpredictable environment, which is the case for a lot of people who have experienced childhood trauma, you often learn that you have to keep others happy first in order for you to feel safe. And over time, you stop listening to what your needs are. You stop paying attention to what it is that you need because you prioritize everybody else and their comfort over your own. So the self-boundaries are about you returning to yourself. And that's where the important self-regulation work comes in. That's why it's important for your nervous system as well, for you to follow through on the things you say you're going to do. Because if you can't trust yourself, how are you going to be able to trust others? So they're a core part of healing self-trust, especially after childhood trauma. Bear in mind some common misunderstandings that people have around boundaries. And that is, boundaries are not rejection and they're not a punishment. It's not you building rigid walls. They're more about connection and healthy relationships. And you don't owe anyone a massively long, full explanation in order for you to set them. And you don't have to announce that you're setting a boundary. It's more about the action. The boundary itself is you knowing for yourself what you will and won't accept. You don't have to declare it and say, this is my boundary. In fact, I suggest you don't approach it in that way, because again, it's not really doing boundaries in a very relational, heart-centered way. It's almost pushing people away and being quite rigid around your boundaries, as opposed to being more assertive, more loving, more caring, and having connection as your focus. It sounds like it's more boundary setting out of fear. So what I would suggest, your challenge, should you choose to accept it, is to pick one area where you might feel drained or resentful, or you just want to work on to feel better around it. I will just go through the 8 types of boundary setting. So it's physical boundaries, emotional boundaries, mental boundaries, time boundaries, material boundaries, sexual boundaries, energetic boundaries, and self boundaries. Now, just because I've given you 8 different categories, it doesn't mean that for every category you have to set a boundary or a bunch of boundaries in every single section, because your boundary setting is very individual to you, and one area might be somewhere where you need to do work, and other areas you might be cool. It might not be an issue for you. Remember, boundary setting is a very personal journey. So it's not about me telling you what your boundaries should be, because again, that's not you developing your self-trust. That's you developing trust in me, which is, that's all lovely for me. But we're looking at your self-growth, your self-development. So in order for you to do that, you have to start trusting yourself more. And if you don't trust yourself very much at this point, then maybe the self-boundaries are where you need to do a bit of work. Name the boundary that's missing. Choose a small, low-stake boundary that you can try out first in a situation where there's not massive consequences and it doesn't automatically make you feel like you're going to be eaten by a lion, right? Choose something where it's not a massive deal so that you can build your capacity and get used to setting boundaries and used to what it feels like, and just practice that more. My boundaries workbook is really good for this. So if you want to grab a copy of that, I will post that link in the show notes. as well as a couple of other boundaries resources as well. I've got, I believe, a couple of other episodes on boundaries that I'll also try and link as well. Okay, catch you next time. Thank you for joining this episode of Healing Childhood Trauma. I hope you found today's discussion insightful and empowering. Remember, healing is a journey and you are not alone on this path. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favourite podcast platform. And you can share this episode with a friend. Your feedback helps this podcast to reach more women who are ready to heal and build secure, healthy relationships and heal from the past.